Hey guys, what's up and welcome back to the channel, and today I'm going to be doing a full breakdown of the new Steelhunter mode. Well, it's not new, but it came back into the game, and if you're interested in playing it, make sure that you stay tuned, and I'm going to be breaking down all the tips and tricks that you need to know of how to ace Steelhunter. Okay, so just so you know guys, I'm just going to do a quick breakdown. Battle Pass just came back, and so instead of being able to earn expedition tokens for completing Steelhunter this year, instead they're doing a thing where you can use Steelhunter to complete the Battle Pass, and that you can earn rewards tanks through the Battle Pass. Make sure that you stay tuned to the channel because I'm going to be posting some videos on the new rewards tanks, the K91PT and the Canoes Panzer that just entered the game just recently, and yeah, let's go ahead and jump right into the video. So if you enter your game, if you click this thing that's next to battle where it says random battle, it'll leave a little drop down menu, and if you click Steelhunter right there, then it will enter you into the Steelhunter game mode, and yeah, it looks pretty cool upon entry. And if you click this year, there's actually not a bunch of stuff that shows you like the rewards and stuff you're gonna get. It just shows you basically the schedule for Steelhunter. So there's going to be one in March, there's going to be 1 week in March where there's 6 days left currently, so there's 1 week in March, 1 week in April, and etc, etc. So it goes through June, and you have all the time that you can complete that. Just keep in mind that there is a ceasefire, so that make sure that you plan around that, because every day you'll have to go on, and if you come right over here, it'll tell you what time Steelhunter is not actually going to be available on the servers. So if you come and you drop down right here, and then you can see today between 12 and 5 and 8 to 12 today, there's going to be a ceasefire, so you can't actually play Steelhunter during those times. So enough talking, let's get down and break down all the tanks in Steelhunter. So there's two different ways to play Steelhunter, and they both require different methods to play. There is a platoon, and if the way that you make a platoon is you just click that, and then boom, you have a platoon. You do need 3 people to be able to do a platoon though, and no less. You can't just do it with 2 people, and it won't just match you up with random people. So you need actually 3 people to play platoon. And there's also solo mode, which is just basically 30 players, throw them all in, and then you have to survive. Actually it might be 20, I don't remember. Yeah, it's actually 20. But for the platoons, it's 30 players, and there's 10 teams of 3. So each vehicle is kind of special in its own way, and some of the vehicles are better for solo mode, some of the vehicles are better for platoon mode, and I'll be telling you all of that. Okay, so the Raven, it's a slightly mobile, a pretty mobile little medium tank. I would say it looks very similar to the T20. As you can see right here, it says its advantages are penetration and speed, disadvantages are hit points and damage per shot. So this thing actually has really nice gun, and it's very powerful at the very start of the battle. So right here you can see all the different vehicle modules, and you can see that it has an auto loader and some damage per shot or loading speed. So I'm going to go through and tell you how I would set this tank up. So first, I really like to use the radio detection cooldown because it just allows me to use my radio more often. And the radio, basically, if you use the radio, then it will show you everything that you need to see that's around you, all the drops, all the enemies, and stuff like that. And if you're in a platoon, then I suggest one of you having the detection range so that you can see farther. But if you're playing solo, definitely just get the radio detection cooldown. Okay, so the engines, if you want to be able to just be driving and be fast when you're driving for a long period of time, get the top speed one. I personally prefer the dynamics. It allows you to accelerate a lot faster and turn faster and all of that stuff. So the gun, the magazine reloading system is actually really good. It does a lot of damage, and it has very good DPM. So I would definitely grab this magazine reloading system. If auto loaders aren't really your thing, then you can get the faster reloading gun on this tank. It's also pretty solid. So if you'd rather be more mobile, then definitely get the mobile hull. But the armor hull also has a decent amount of armor actually. This tank can get pretty armored if you set it up correctly, so it's just your opinion on this. So the rotation speed is good if you already went with the mobility hull, and keep in mind that the top gun that you can choose also depends on what turret you are using. So if you want to use the the fast loading gun, you need to use the rotation turret, but if you want to use the damage per shot gun, you need to use the armored turret. So, but this is really up to you. The armored turret does have some decent armor, but it's nothing substantial as you will get on some of the heavier vehicles. So the top guns, if you like loading speed, this is really all preference. I would say the magazine reloading system is the best one. If you enjoy just bursting your opponents out, it's very, very solid. And what's also good about it is you can get it with either turret. If you don't want the magazine reloading system, I would suggest the loading system gun. And so yeah, that's the Raven for you. It's very good for solos, and it's also quite good for platoons. We've had some 3-person platoon where we're all Ravens, and we've performed very well. Okay, so each tank also has like a couple special abilities that are special to that tank. So on the Raven, it is target tracking. So this reduces its gun dispersion, improves its gun stabilization, and also reduces its aiming time for 20 seconds. So you find these in the supplies and the provisions drops, the green ones that shoot out green smoke. You can pick up these there. It also has trap. This one's super useful. It decreases the dynamic characteristics of enemy vehicles by 50% for 20 seconds in this little circle. Super good for rushing your enemies and brawling them out. Okay, so next is the Valkyr, and this is basically a German heavy tank. I'd say it's a miniature Tiger 1. That's what it looks like at its lowest tier. So you can see it has very high hit points, damage per shot, and its speed and radio detection operation isn't actually that great though. So it's definitely one of the slower lumbering tanks that you can get, but you heavy tank lovers, this is definitely one that you're going to love playing. So the cool thing about this one is this is probably the best level 2 tank because it has these great engines once you get to level 2, and once you get that, you're basically an amazing tank. Until you get to the higher tiers, then usually other tanks can outperform you if you're not good enough and skilled enough with this tank. For a new player, I'd probably recommend the Harbinger or the Raven, but if you're a more experienced player with armor and stuff, this tank is definitely one that you would like to pick up. So the dynamics, I really suggest this on this tank. It'll allow it to accelerate way faster, and you can do some pretty deadly ramming in this thing. And yeah, this is definitely pretty cool feature of this tank if you use the engine power. And the top speed if you just want to be accelerating over a long distance, but I really suggest the dynamics on this tank. You definitely need the radio detection cooldown on this one because its detection radius isn't actually that good, so definitely get this one on this tank. I would suggest the higher damage per shotgun if you're in a platoon because it's nice to have that good punch that you can use if you're fighting with some medium tanks. But if you're a solo, I suggest using the other gun because it does allow you to play more situationally. So yeah, that's how I would set up this tank once you get to the 4th stage. So the armor on this tank is very, very good if you get the armor, but I would actually suggest the hit points because this tank can get an insane amount of hit points, and it really does just keep taking the hits over and over and over. So if you're good at angling armor and stuff like that, definitely get the armored one. But if you'd rather have hit points where you can just keep going, get the hit points. Same for this. This one actually doesn't have very much armor. This one is quite heavily armored if you know how to use it. So this tank has 3 gun choices once it hits tier 7. It has a magazine reloading system. This one only has 4 shells. It has a loading speed and a damage per shot. So what I would say for this one is if you're in a platoon, definitely get the damage per shot because 765 alpha is definitely really nice to just smack into your opponents. And if you're going solo, I would suggest using the loading speed gun because you can be more dynamic with how you fight. So the Valkyr, it actually has 2 really nice ones. It has turbocharger, which basically shoots fire out of the rear end of this tank, and you can ram them and do some devastating things. I love using the turbocharger and ramming people in with this tank. Its repair zone basically just heals your tank and removes all the damage off your modules. So it's good for in a platoon, or if you just need to get back on full hit points, it's helpful for that as well. Okay, so the next tank is the Varyag, and this is basically a Walker except Russian, and it has better armor, better angles, damage per shot, and same disadvantages, speed, and radio detection operation. So let's go ahead and jump right in. This tank is actually very good once you get its engine as well. Definitely get dynamics. If you want to get top speed, you can snatch that as well, but I would very much suggest dynamics as well as radio detection cooldown. So this tank has some very interesting gun choices once you hit tier 4. If you like double guns, if you know how to work them, if you know how to fire the salvos, if you just like double guns in general, 100% pick up the double gun. It's very good for brawling, and it's very meaty when you're in the a platoon to be able to pop out and pop that double shell into the enemy tanks. The damage per shotgun is also good, especially if you are on a solo, because it does allow you to be more maneuverable, and but the double gun does also allow for that. So this is literally pretty much just whatever you want to choose. If you like double guns, grab that. If you just like a standard gun, get the damage per shotgun on this tank. So I would suggest the armor layout on this tank because it's just it just works a lot better for me, because this tank is very heavily armored if you set it up correctly. This one does also have some pretty solid armor, so again, if you're more experienced with angling your armor, definitely pick up the armor ones. If you would rather just keep taking the hits though, pick up the survivability ones. Both of them are good choices. So once you hit the top, there are 3 gun choices. You have the fast reloading gun, the double gun, and the damage per shotgun. I would suggest actually just pick whatever you really want. If you're doing a solo, I would either suggest the double gun or the loading speed gun, because the damage per shotgun is just kind of hard to use in a solo because they can put so many rounds into you if they have a faster reloading gun and you just have to be reloading. In a platoon, all 3 of these guns would work very nicely. So the Varyag, this one's also pretty solid, and it has some good consumables. It can lay a minefield, which basically just lays mines everywhere, and if your enemies drive on them, it does a ton of damage. So this one's definitely a pretty cool one if you know how to use it. And then the recovery zone is basically the exact same thing, except it just recovers the hit points, except it recovers more hit points than you would in the Walker, but it definitely recovers a lot of hit points, and it's good for a platoon. So the Varyag, definitely a good pick. It's just an all-around, well-armored vehicle if you upgrade it in the correct ways. Definitely not one for newer players, but if you are pretty experienced, you can do some nice things in this tank. So next is the Harbinger Mk4. This one is one of my favorites, and it is pretty much just a good all-around vehicle. Good penetration, good radio detection operation. Its poor sides are damage per shot and speed. I'm not sure why they put speed here. It's actually quite a mobile vehicle, and its armor is actually quite good, but you don't really need the damage per shot because you do have a really good rate of fire. So let me just show you this real quick. So definitely get the radio detection cooldown. If you're playing in a platoon, you could pick up their detection range, but I suggest cooldown if you're doing a solo. Get the dynamics, that's what I would suggest, because this tank is actually kind of slow at the start. That's why they have that speed as a disadvantage. But if you pick up the dynamics engine, you can actually get really mobile. So this tank actually has an auto reloader that you can choose on this tank. The auto reloader is pretty good for solos and platoons. If you know how to use an auto reloader, I would suggest using it. You can be a lot more effective with it. If you're newer, or if you just want to play some solos where you don't want to have to be with all the stress of having an auto reloader, get the loading speed gun. It's also very solid, and you have some good DPM on both these guns. So if you pick up the armor layout on these tanks, they do have some actually pretty okay armor. So if you just want to rush people and then just use your armor to get those occasional bounces, yeah, you can definitely do that. If you want them to be more mobile and be able to maneuver around your enemies, definitely do that instead. But this is really just a matter of opinion. There's not one that is better than the other. So these 3 guns, they're all very good. If you are doing a solo, I would suggest not getting the high damage gun. The auto reloading gun is also good, and the loading speed gun is good too. All 3 of these guns are very good for platoons, but I would just suggest not getting the damage per shotgun if you're doing a solo, because it's harder to reload, have that long reload when you're playing just by yourself. So the Harbinger's provisions are Corrosive Mist. This adds the concealment bonus to all the vehicles within range of this consumable. It also deals damage to all the vehicles in its range. It's kind of tough to use, and it can get a little bit out of control, but if you know how to use it, it can definitely help you out. The Berserker significantly boosts everything about the tank. Its reload time, its accuracy, it basically just boosts it all around, but then it will deduct the hit points of your vehicle for a little bit. But it's good for rushing people if you have enough hit points that you can just totally demolish their vehicle very fast. So the Harbinger, definitely good all around. This one can be very good in pretty much all situations. So the last tank is the Arleiquin. This one's definitely a weird one. This is the light tank of the group. It has good loading speed. It does have poor armor and hit points though. If you can perform in this tank in solos, usually you can win a good percentage of your time. So if you're a solid player, definitely go check this one out. This one doesn't really perform that well in platoon situations, but it performs extremely well in solo modes because you just have that mobility, and this thing has some pretty solid guns. So I would suggest using the radio detection cooldown on this tank, because if you can be doing it more often, you can play kind of a scout role for your tanks and for your tank, and you can be really effective at spotting the enemies out. So this one's actually pretty interesting. If you're planning on like driving around a lot and being more of a scout, definitely get the top speed one. If you're planning on more of like trying to brawl your enemies, then you would rather have the dynamics. This thing's not that much of a brawler, but if you're planning on being more aggressive and circling your enemies, get the dynamics. It'll help you out a lot. Okay, so this thing has two very interesting guns. It has a double gun, definitely not as good as the double gun on the Varyag, but it's definitely solid. But no, do not get this unless you love double guns and hate autoloaders, because this magazine reloading system is very, very nice for circling your enemies and just putting shell after shell into them, because this thing has 4 shells in its container, with actually some decent penetration for a tier 4 gun, and very good damage per minute on an autoloader. So definitely get the mobility on this. If you'd rather have hit points, I mean, I guess you can if you want, but the mobility is definitely better if you're trying to play more of a scouting role. If you'd rather try to circle your enemies and stuff, I would also get mobility too. If you just would like to survive more, I mean, I guess you could get the hit points, but in my opinion, the mobility is definitely the way to go. Okay, so there are 3 gun choices once you get to level 7, and yes, there's definitely one that is far better than all the others, and it is the anti-tank machine gun. This thing has 10 shells in its magazine, only 0.5 seconds between each shell, and with only 11-second reload time. It does only do 110 damage if you're using heat and 80 if you're using APCR, but this thing's DPM is through the roof, 4,258 DPM, so definitely use this if you're skilled, or even if you're not skilled. Just click that right mouse button and lock onto your target and just fire shell after shell after shell. Very good. If you want to use the HE auto reloading shell, I believe it is. It's an auto loader with HE. Then I mean, I guess you can use it if you want to, but it really doesn't work as well as it sounds like it will, because everything has pretty solid armor once you get to the end. Because you're not really going to be penning anything, so I wouldn't use this. The double gun, I would definitely use the anti-tank machine gun, so that's why I would tell you to get the mobility for the rotation speed. So yeah, the Arleiquin has two consumables as well. It has an airstrike, which basically you just drop a bunch of missiles from the sky and it will deal some splash damage to your enemies if it lands on them. Very useful in about all situations. And the fireball is also super cool. It's basically just a fireball that drops from the clouds, and it will chase around your enemies for 30 seconds, and then if it touches your enemies, it'll detonate and do a ton of damage. So this one's super useful. This one's power provisions are actually really cool. And yeah, that's a simple breakdown of all these tanks. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did enjoy it, leave a comment and like, and we'll see you next time.